This podcast is brought to you by Steede Motor Group, Claregalway. For your personalised vehicle shopping experience, find out more at steedemotorgroup.ie. So delighted now to be joined by Maurice Brosnan of the Irish Examiner to look at the quarterfinals of the Senior Football Championship, which are eventually coming up this weekend. There's a lot to be debated. Obviously, the Michaels appeal went in. It was unsuccessful, and then we had Tuam overcoming Berna last night in the preliminary quarterfinals. So we do have a big weekend of football action in the senior and intermediate championships in the quarterfinals coming up this weekend. Before we do, Maurice, because I know I was communicating over and back with you about the appeal, and no one knew what was going to happen with the quarterfinal, the structure of the group. Galway decided to go for the old system rather than the new system, which we're seeing being implemented. If three teams are level on points, it's just those three games with them three teams that come into consideration for the goal difference. What did you make of the whole saga?
I might take the facts for a second before I give you my opinion on it. So the reason, as far as my understanding is on this, the reason that Galway's hands were bound to go with the old scoring system is because their bylaws weren't adapted by the time Congress had happened. So that their championship structure, the current championship structure, was in place before Congress. So if they formed it after Congress, but because it was an adaptation of their bylaws, they weren't able to change it afterwards. This was advice based off precedent set in other counties. A case in Offa's Gracefields went to the DRA. So this was the advice that Galway were given. So, from my understanding, I think an email went out to clubs initially suggesting we're going to go to new system. That was clarified a couple of days later to clarify they're going for the old system. I know there's been some screenshots doing the rounds of the groups, and people are wondering why the groups weren't organised with this. I think, again, as far as I understand, that was an IT glitch. It was set to the same setting that hurling was probably using the new scoring system. So that's why some of the groups look different until they've been adapted to take into account that was the old scoring system. So all of that, I think, is fairly reasonable. We're talking at the end of the day too, Paul. I know, people love to give out and hit out here. We're talking about volunteers here too, and I think their hands are bound by a league of precedents here. It's very unfortunate for a lot of clubs. It goes to show, reflect the nature that how tight Galway football is in general, that the difference between relegation and a quarter-final could literally be your interpretation of a scoring rule. So from that perspective, that's I think that's why we were caught in the situation we were caught in. As you mentioned, Michael's were in front of the County Council. That was unsuccessful. They have the option to go to the DRA if they want to. Similarly, I think Uachtar and Calastrahan have the option to go to appeal further if they want to. So from what we know now, we're going to plough on this weekend. So that's all the facts of the thing. But separate to all of that, I do think, and if you look at the championship this year, I think the new scoring system is the way to go. And next year, I think that was proven by some of the games this year. For example, I'll just give you an example. And this, I'm talking about my own club here, but you still have to be objective about this kind of stuff. Barna were in the final group game against the Corofin team who'd already qualified. So should that game be, a Corofin team who didn't have the same precedence, that they might have had the same importance of that game, they might have had a round earlier, for example. So should that game actually affect the scoring difference between teams that don't involve Corofin? I don't necessarily think so. I think that's why it's a good rule. It's a proper rule. You get the flip side of that, which is, a team who's been hammered at the bottom, and you don't want that to inflict it if it's the top three either. So by and large, I think the rule is valid. It's been very frustrating that we're in this situation. I know it's been a huge worry and concern for clubs and for everybody within it. I would absolutely love if it's all parked now, to be honest, just from a football perspective, that the championship isn't held up or we're not debating all this. I think it was reasonably well understood. It was clarified afterwards what had happened, that we were going with. I certainly know that by and large, anybody I spoke that was aware of the fact that we were going with the old system for football, that it wasn't going to be the same as hurling. The Irish Examiner, I didn't write the article now, but my newspaper actually had a story about this. They clarified it around the time of Johnny Glynn's appeal, that it was going to be the old system. But yeah, so I hope we can drive on. I hope it's not going to be holding up games or affect them. But I suppose we'll have to wait and see in that regard.
Yeah, it does seem somewhat like it's going to be settled in park now, but we don't know for sure. Obviously, yeah, but that's what it does seem like, and that we're going to have quarterfinals in the senior and intermediate this weekend. So just last night, before we kind of get into the quarterfinals, obviously last week we looked back at the games, and then it was obviously decided then that Tuam and Barna was going to be Tuesday evening in that preliminary quarterfinal in Ballinasloe, which took place last night, where Tuam Stairs were ran out victors in the end over Berna. You're obviously involved with Berna this year. Is there no complaints really from a Berna side after Tuam's victory last night?
Oh, I don't know. Like, I should, a condition of me coming on here should have been that I wasn't talking about this game. Yeah, like, well, I start with, I'm obviously, I attached to Ireland, but I think to just give due credit to the winner. So I think Tuam are a very good team. I think they're excellent. I think I might have, I can't remember if I said it here or not after the No More game. I thought they should have won that day, and their group would have looked very different. Like the two great goal chances in the first half. One was flashed over the bar, one went wide. They're still up when they were red card for kind of a silly incident off the ball, and even actually to get level again towards the end of that game, and then concede a free out near the sideline. That's a wondrous kick from a free, and they end up losing by a point. But if they'd won that game, the complexion of their group looks very different. They were also in the league final. A really well set up team, an excellent goalkeeper. He's very good at getting his kickouts off. They're a brave team, Paul. It's unusual. If you watch anybody watching Tuam this weekend, on their own, on Forkin's kickouts, they'll bring every player bar one outside the 45. So they're totally open. So they've all that space inside the 45 to break into it because they want to get it off short because they're so good at maximising the shot at the end of it. But the flip side of that is that, if he doesn't get that ball off, like if you try and get that short and it's intercepted, you're totally exposed. You don't have a full back line in place because you've pulled everybody out of it. So a really brave team, but I thought they were a better side last night. Just wouldn't be a huge amount of complaints. But Gary O'Donnell was absolutely unbelievable. He gave a kick pass in the first half into Jamie Murphy for Conor Rattigan scored a point. He just had to tap it over at the end of it. But just the vision from Gary, he's standing up. Some of our best forwards at the other end of the pitch. He just builds in kind of quarterback role when they go forward. He could do effectively whatever they need him to do. He's still that rampaging wing back that certainly hasn't lost him either. So I thought he was excellent. As I mentioned, a very good goalkeeper. I think Rory O'Connor has been absolutely immense throughout the group stages and again last night. Mark Holland is a very good player. Mannion inside is a really good tackler. Like he does a lot of work. So from Tuam's perspective, I think they're a full value for it. I'd say they were buzzing after that appeal on Monday night to know that within a week they could have, you're looking at that and you're thinking in the back of your mind there's a threat of relegation still here, and now suddenly 5 days later you could be in a semi-final. Like I'd say they were absolutely buzzing off that. They had a great crowd, like huge support in Ballinasloe last night. Real credit to the club for that. And yeah, they were full value for it. They started very well. They managed they had a black card in the second half and managed it like expertly well, controlled possession, went out long, were losing their kickouts, but even still weren't actually necessarily conceding it. And we just struggled we're trying to carve out opportunities, but an issue all year is maybe creating shots but not getting them off, and it came back to bite us, I suppose, in the end.
Just with Berner, because the last two games have kind of been, there's been so many opportunities created. I think it was 20 against Corofin, 18 last night against Tuam, so 38 shots in 2 games. But like we'll obviously touch again back in on Tuam when we do touch on that Corofin game. But for Berner, do you consider this year a successful season?
I wouldn't go overboard either. Like the game last night, Paul, we started very poorly. Like kickouts going over the line. Conceded some poor points, missed a fairly routine free, but the lads were great heart, like real great character to come back and create out good opportunities. And we were right in the game at half time, and then even after half time they scored directly from the throw in an unbelievable point. Scored another point again. You're starting to worry, was it going to come away from us? Made 2 changes, and Ray Keneally kicked a fabulous point. Keane Hernan, as he often does, just put the shoulder down, kicked a great score. And I actually think it was, the score was, I didn't necessarily see this instance as clearly as if Galway Bay were behind me. I could hear the commentary during the game. And the score was 9-5, sorry, with 7 minutes left. So we were down by 4 points. And Forkin took too long over a kick out. So a hot ball, referee went in to threw it up. Keane Hernan won the ball, hand passed it out to McCumsky. He kicked the ball over the bar. Suddenly we're down to 3 and you're thinking, geez, this is on here. And the referee had pulled it back. He said that he didn't hand pass it, he threw it. So, and then because McCumsky actually kicked the point, he kicked the ball away, so they brought free up to the 45. But so I didn't see the incident. I could hear maybe from what I heard the commentary from Galway behind me, I thought maybe, oh, was that actually, did he see a clip? And I saw a clip back of it. I watched the game back today, and look, it was a mistake. We all make mistakes, but it was one of those kind of bad mistakes that end up. So in that situation, we were back in it, and that maybe could change the complexion. But like that's not an excuse by any stretch of imagination. As you mentioned, if you're getting off 18 shots, probably need to do more. But broadly, I think the season has been very positive. A huge amount of young players, as I mentioned to you before. It's a very young team. Won a league title, and that's part of the reason I'm not. It's still kind of sore enough one to talk about is that like a lot of there's huge scope there. Like a brilliant manager, like a genuinely. I'd be hard pressed to think if there's many better in the county, just from my experience and seeing the level of prep that goes into it. A superb captain, a lot of very talented young players, like a huge amount of scope there. That's probably why there's an element of frustration that they probably were capable of at least taking one step more. But so could you call it a success? We're probably capable of more, so it wasn't a unconvincing success, but it certainly wasn't a failure either. It's kind of one of those vague ones that I'm sure we'll cycle through the stages of grief, and I'll be able to articulate it a bit better maybe in a few days.
It probably is one of the best seasons. Was it a couple of years ago when Barna got to that quarter final? I think it was against Tuam under Sean Conlon. Would you say then that this season has probably been the kind of next best thing compared to that? Yeah,
and they're kind of simple. It's funny enough, similar managers. Sean was there before that. Obviously, like he's a Barna man. He would have been there under Pat Fallon in 2014. Barna got to a semi-final or beat my Michaels in a semi-final. And Sean would have been in then he went in with Kevin Welsh with Galway, but very kind of tactically astute. I'd say it was a big. Certainly for me at that stage, I would have been a young player at that stage, and it was real educational. You were learning about structure and setup and the terminology that comes with it, and the level of prep that it takes, and even just S&C and all that kind of stuff. And that has actually been since Sean came back, and now under Dave, same thing again. It's kind of a huge education. I think the standards, all that stuff is massively. The club has massively benefited from that. So yeah, from that perspective, yeah, you're right. Like it just is. There would be kind of a gnawing sense that we were capable of more to a certain extent. That, but sure, look, I mean, everybody's kind of one-eyed with this stuff, and I'm sure you would see it from that perspective. You'd always think it's there, but it's a frustrating one because I would have, Paul, I would have played with a lot of the leaders in this team now, the older lads. I would have played with them or gone to school with them, so I know like how much they put into it. I know how much they care about it. I know from a management perspective, everybody involved there, like just fabulous clubmen. So I know how much they've all given, and you're not saying it's a failure either, but you would have loved to have seen like a proper testament to the work that went in, like so a kind of something to hold up as. And I do think the team was capable of more than a Premier League quarter-final. But look, you get what football is a meritocracy too. Like you get what you deserve, and last night was probably a testament to that too. So I would, it's a hard one to necessarily put a broad assessment on the season as a whole. But ultimately they're beat by a good team last night.
Before we get in and look at some of the games, for my sins, I was over last night at the Man U Galatasaray game. I looked at the draw and I seen Corofin, Tuam Stars, Mike Collins, Salsa, and Knocknacara. And obviously you have Claregalway, Milltown as well, which I'm sure Milltown were kind of hoping for that draw too. And then you look at James's Milltown, like what a draw this is. Oh, it was cracker. Yeah. I was up the back of the stands, and there's kind of a few people. The draw happened right after the game, so both teams had gone into the dressing room. So there was only kind of a few heads knocking around, but then immediately, a couple of minutes later, word spreads around Ballinasloe about the draw, and people are just bouncing all over the place. Like this, it sets it up so lovely. Like there's so many great draws. I would say I was talking to somebody else about this last night. I think it's fairly reasonable to say that even quietly, every team in that draw would fancy their chances of getting out this weekend. Like they would, internally there would be a degree of confidence that we can, if we turn up and perform to the best of our ability, we can nab a semi-final spot here, and that's what you want. I think it goes back to the point we made at the very start of this. Like it's a testament to the competitors. I think it's been far from actually the best championship in terms of quality that Galway has had. I think we're probably a small bit down on that, but in terms of competitiveness and that you couldn't fraud it. And also, it's a great credit to, I was thinking about this earlier, I think it's 6 of the same 8 from last year. And that's, given the nature of Galway football, that's a remarkable level of consistency. Yeah. So you swap out Michaels and Anadown, Yeah.
And it's the same 6. And so I think, that's fairly impressive too. But look, it's, and in terms of anticipating what is to come, you couldn't but be excited. The only small thing, I know this is, again, it's unavoidable. We've got games on Saturday. I would have loved to split them Saturday and Sunday, and you could get to all 4. I think there's a lot of people, I know, I would happily go to all 4 of those games if I could. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of people in the same boat. But look, they haven't announced the stream, and hopefully we'll be able to watch them anyway.
Yeah, it's the streaming in Pierce that's they're going to be the games that are streamed. So James's Montpellier and Mike Cullen and Salthill. There's 2 games in Pierce. It's 1:45 on Sunday, James's Montpellier and Mike Cullen Salthill. 3:30. They repeated last year's county final in the quarterfinal. We can't really start anywhere else. But Mike Cullen Salthill, obviously, because it's repeated last year's county final. I listened to John O'Mahony's kind of comments after their draw over Richard, and you could tell straight away he wanted improvement. It seems to be kind of a very stop-start year for them. But like, if you look back to last year's county final, they were the better team for large parts of that game. Now they have a chance at redemption, which I'm sure these players have been thinking about since that defeat to Mike Cullen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like, has there been an unluckier team in the county since then? You go back to, we played them in a league final. They're without, that was the week after Galway played Mayo. So I think John Maher came on, but the rest of the lads didn't play that day. They go into the Corofin game, which was the first group game. By all accounts, I think the talk was there was a virus in the camp that week. So some of the lads were sick. On top of that, then you get a couple of very frustrating injuries, and that game just totally slides away from them. And then suddenly, you go a week later, Rob Finley looks in absolutely outrageous form. He goes down with that fairly horrible looking back injury. John Maher goes off injured again. I think you a week later or the next round, Tom McLean and Armstrong are both on the sideline, both not fit. So it's just, there's been one thing after another trying to deal with it. Now on the flip side, like, I think a lot of players have actually taken a step from such aspect. I think Charlie Power has been excellent this year. He's really taken a step forward. And as you mentioned, they have by God, did they have a cause now? Like, in terms of, I'd say the image of Cook rising above Lavelle has not left some of those boys' heads for a year now. Like, I do think that the manner of that loss. Can
they turn them over this weekend?
I think so, yeah. If my Cullen were going to be, I always say this. I think if my Cullen were going to be bet, it was going to be bet in the qualifying. I think as they build up steam, so I think that they have a cause. They absolutely have the ability, But that's the thing, is that the only thing they're trying to, you have a cause, you have the ability, but do you have confidence? And I don't know if they will have confidence because of the manner of their performances this year. They just come up, to a certain extent short in a couple of games. So, but everything else, like, I'd say, I wouldn't confidently be saying Mike Cullen are going to win this game either. Like, I think if they were going to be caught, I think it would be at a quarter-final stage.
So you're looking for Salthill. That game, they've been down Garage, Armstrong and Evan Murphy in their last game against Duke. Not sure exactly what the situation is with those two this weekend. You look at Mike Cullen, Mulcahy, Cook and Kelly don't play against Annadown. Do them three automatically come back in? I
think they might have played a friendly against Mayo Club and the boys were playing Cook and Kelly. So okay. So I think they might be okay. I think they will be back. Yeah, I think they'll play. I look, Paul. The reality is, I mean, you can talk about the need to train. You can have all these lovely principles about club football, but the nature of the calendar now is that if you look across, I'm talking about across Ireland now. You look at go to Sligo, defending champions Trailer Strand didn't get out. Roscommon, defending champions Strokestown, relegated. Mayo, defending champions Westport, turned over by Brayfield last weekend. Moved on to Munster. Defending champions in Kerry, Carnarally's now in relegation again. If you stretch your year the way Mike Cullen did getting to a semi-final, exactly like Carnarally's did, you don't get a break. You're turned that straight over, and your intercounty players definitely don't get a break because they turn straight over. So you're on the go basically for 24 months if you want to have the years that you want to have. So within that, you have to have windows of down periods. You just have to manage players. And I know it might be frustrating for other people to see clubmates off on holidays or whatever they're doing, but this is just the reality. Like, you have to cater for, particularly for intercounty players. So Peter Cook is back and available. I think Peter Cook plays. If Sean Kelly is back and available, I think Sean Kelly plays. James McLaughlin is off in, I think he's
The
got
combine, yeah.
in Australia. So he's doing a 2K time trial on Saturday with they have a national draft in for the 17 to 19-year-olds in Australia. Guys who will be Australians will be entering the draft, be drafted by clubs, and there's 4 Irish guys over there, and he will do that with them. So he'll test with the Australian kids. So it'll be a very good, if a club is considering signing him, it'd be a really good comparison. You'd see exactly what level he's at versus the Australians. So he was at the grand final last weekend, and he'll be doing that this weekend. But yeah, I think.
So he's out this weekend, is he?
Yeah, he won't be back. Yeah, that test is on Saturday, I think. Friday or Saturday. I think it's Saturday. Is that. So yeah. Unless now he's found a way to get back in overnight, but I don't think so. So he won't be. I presume he won't be around. But I'd say they'll be picking from a fairly full hand after that. And as I say, I just think it's totally understandable. The nature of club football now is that you have to be adapted with this sort of stuff.
The thing with Mike Cullen, it's so intriguing this weekend. We haven't seen them with a full team like this year. Who's going to make it? Because obviously Johnny Maloney has come in this year, so he wouldn't have been there last year. Young Sean O'Connor's really seemed to add to it up front as well. Jared Davern's kind of went to a more deeper role in midfield. But like, who's going to miss out in this Mike Cullen starting 15 is going to be intriguing.
But yeah, very much so. And I do think that's a nice luxury to have. Like I don't know, I've been so impressed by the impact Maloney has had since he come back. I know maybe we shouldn't be impressed. He was a brilliant footballer for Offaly, but he just has, he's elevated so much what they do. You got such an uncanny ability to, when you get into that kind of set defence, he's the guy who often will instigate the initial break that leads to something beyond that. So he'll drop a shoulder and go left or right. Tuam actually Mark Holleran is a guy who's really good at that for Tuam. He just like a little jink, drop the shoulder, breaks through, and then suddenly you can carry that overlap up the pitch. One line break leads to another, and that's the game of chess that football is now at the minute. So, and I think the thing about Mike Cullen is that they're a very set team. You kind of see this trend. They remind me a small bit of a couple of that management team would have involved with the Mayo 20s, and they remind me of that Mayo team, like a really well organised team, very well controlled. Would probably when they get into the kind of controlled phase type of ball, games naturally tend to get a bit closer. Like if you can keep, I would say from a Sochiel perspective, they might be looking to, and rather than getting to a shootout with Mike Cullen, they lean into that and kind of you might not necessarily see as many phases of attacks and that sort of thing. But that, I think that would kind of tally with what we saw in last year's county final. So like in terms of it is a selection headache, but it's a lot nicer selection headache than the alternative, isn't it?
Yeah, Micheál O'Reilly's one lad we haven't seen for Mike Cullen either this year. Not sure what his story is going to be this weekend. You mentioned Johnny Maloney there. Do you expect him to be given a man-marking role now this weekend?
Matchups are so interesting in this game. I think they're really interesting. If you look at one of the most dominant players, bar maybe the Barney game, but one of the players who's had the most success this year, I think, is Cathal Sweeney. Like he just has his rampage for it, and so that's a real challenge. I know it's a weird thing maybe for some people to say you have to man mark wing back, but when it's a player like Cathal Sweeney, there's probably a few in the county. Cathal Sweeney, Kieran Malloy. A guy who will, I think, a wing back who will never become this type of player. A player I've been so impressed with this year, Brian Mitchell, the young lad from Clannon. These kind of wing backs who are so good, powerful going forward with the ball, are very energetic, are very unselfish, will lay on as well as they can. I think that's something that you need to cater for. So from a Mike Cullen perspective, they're going to need to designate someone to that. So like, you can, there's a couple of things you could do in that regard. Gallagher did a Trojan amount of work last year. Like it probably an unseen element of his game is how much he was willing to sacrifice himself. I personally, I kind of like the idea sometimes of bringing a halfback forward into that role. And if you've got a wing back marking a wing back, for example, I think that would suit nicely.
Alone Kelly's played at 11 at stages.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I was going with this. Yeah, so I think that, two thoroughbreds, a guy who athletically would have no issue with it, who is totally willing to sacrifice himself to do that role. I think that would be an intriguing matchup, and you could see that. So you go back to last year's county final. Rob was mixing between 11 and 14 in Perseidom last year, and Mulcahy went with him both ways, went in and out with him. I think you probably would expect to tally that matchup. I think John Maher, because of what he's doing from kickoffs now, if Cup come back in, I think it's just a showdown between the two of them. It's and one thing you'll notice a lot with Sawtell now is that like Lavelle's kickoffs are amazing and he's so good at getting them off. But when he goes long, it's Maher who's calling it, not Lavelle. He's, even though he's might be doing signals and stuff. So I think that he's got a huge target for them, and they probably don't have as much beyond that with what they're doing. So I fully expect to see that much up as well. Donny Hunt's been very good this year again. Like a guy with bags of potential. That's something that they're going to need to worry about. And then on the flip side, like does William Finlay to go to Desi? You probably would expect so. So I think like the more you talk through it, again, I know the sort of form isn't there, but the more you talk through the matchups, you can fully see why they won't necessarily have a huge amount of fear for this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And just on Lavelle, do you still think the door's open intercounty-wise?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think it like perhaps his kickouts are like he back to a real guy who's so hard to get a read on now. He's very good at that kind of clip ball he loves it kind of that left pocket onto his left there. It's another one. Bernie Power actually is a similar one there. If he's in trouble, he kind of that deep right, he would often end up going to that, and Lavelle kind of reminds me a small bit of that. But I think we've had this conversation before, Paul. The national conversation around Galway goalkeepers, I think, is different to the conversation we're having in Charlie. I think Galway are very well stocked, to be honest. Go back to how much of a weapon for Dunmore this year has Gleason's boom, that massive kick out that he has. Bernie Power has been exactly what he is. If I still, I'm not going to come on and do it, but if you wanted to press me for a Barnet Player of the Year, James Kane is in the conversation, and he just has been. He's gone to another level again. So I think they're very well, and that's not to mention I said earlier Dara Fork and another guy who's been excellent this year. So I think they're very well stocked. No, I'm not saying he doesn't have the ability either, but in terms of, I think it's more a reflection of what's there than the gap, if you know what I mean.
So with Sawtell, the back six has been fairly settled this year. You probably expect O'Mac Fadden, Daniel O'Flaherty, William Finnerty, David Compton, Owen Dealey, Carl Sweeney to play as that back six, Cullen and Mayer midfield. It seems like half forward line's going to be the one kind of that's the biggest decision really for them this weekend. If you look at the Derek game, it was Paddy Kitt, Evan Nolan, Ty Carron. You talk about Donny Hunt there. We don't know Garage Armstrong, Evan Murphy, but that's the biggest decision for Sawtell management team to make this weekend. Yeah, it is. And like you go back to the Corofin game and they had Harron, I think Paddy Kitt came on the second half that day, and Donny Hunt as well. And they're very different players, you would probably argue. Paddy Kitt is probably a guy, another very unselfish player, just as a short amount of work. Donny Hunt is, I think he's electric. I think he's a very good kick-out option for them. Evan Murphy has actually become a very good kick-out option for him. That kind of floated down the middle, and he just kind of comes crashing underneath it, and they would set that well. They probably, if you look at the way they played against Corofin, like they kicked a huge amount of ball. That I think I think there's a perception out there that Corofin's full-back line we'll talk about this again, I'm sure, in a couple of minutes, can be got at, and because maybe they're not the tallest, and I don't know if Sawtell picked up on that or not, but they kicked a huge amount of ball inside, and not a lot of it stuck. And since then, they've been a bit better at maybe working the ball and getting players to float around. Ty Carron is another one actually who, again, brings a huge amount of that kind of pure and utter graft. So if they were to go for something like offer Paddy Kitt again, offer something like Ty Carron again, they're kind of guys that would run themselves into the ground for 40 minutes, and then when the game is a bit more open, you could easily introduce someone like Evan Murphy, for example, who would do damage as well. Just then, on Mike Cullen, do you just suspect if it's going to be more or less the same, and if McLaughlin looks like he's not available, Cook just comes into the middle with Davern then? I think so. That's what I would anticipate. Yeah. Now he didn't actually, like last year, he didn't actually play a huge amount in midfield, even when McLaughlin was obviously injured at the time. They had Clark and Clark in midfield at the time, so he wasn't necessarily he didn't play there as much. But I think it's a position that suits him. I think that matchup, if he was to go to John Maher, well, would be box office. I don't think anybody would complain about it. But I also think it would suit them both in terms of what they're trying to do, competing in the air, and again, two lads who
will just run themselves into the ground as well. So I could see both teams kind of fancying that as a duel and letting it play out as we see it.
Just then, I know I touched on Johnny Maloney, but Niall Walsh has actually been very key for Mike Cullen throughout the group stages. 1-2 against Down. But even when there's been a couple of questions asked of him throughout the group, he's been their go-to forward, you could say, at stages during this championship.
Yeah, I think I said it to you after I watched him in the league game against Row, the relegation playoff against Row, and it was kind of it was a weird game. They started kind of weird, but once they put the squeeze on, they just lined. Tom Clark was playing that day. Jared Avon came, as we mentioned, was coming a bit deeper. McLaughlin was out around the middle. Just lined up these, the monstrous heavies across the middle, and they left Walsh and Desi inside, and the ball was still sticking. Like, they still got a huge amount out of their inside line. And I remember thinking at the time, do they mess with that? Would we see Davern, for example, rotate back inside? That was like, I don't know if you remember, 2 days later, the two boys were the extra players for Galway against Armagh. They both end up having to do the warm-up because of 2 injuries, and they weren't even allowed to play because the forms were submitted in time. So that was kind of an up and down period for them. But I definitely think like that. It was probably one element that, if you were to pick holes in Mike Cullen last year, was one thing that, did they have an option inside to kind of get the ball to stick, like a direct ball option is what I'm talking about here. And I don't necessarily think it tallies as much from what I've seen this year as maybe it would have been a fear that they didn't have that ability. When you go back to the Glen semi-final, for example, that you're kind of thinking, should they try and get somebody, a target man inside, and try and progress a bit further? But it wouldn't be something that has struck me as much so far this year.
If you'd call this one,
I'm going to go with Cullen because, again, I haven't seen the form from Sawtill, but I'm sure, as I said to you, I'm sure Sawtill have absolutely no fear with this. But I said from the very start, I think Mike Cullen will win the championship this year, and I'm not going to deviate from what I've seen so far.
The game before that is St. James's against Mike Cullen. Two teams are coming into this in kind of really different form, you could say. Montpellier, there's going to be questions asked of them coming into this one, probably just the nature of their group campaign being up and down. Drew Dunmore, and then lost that game to Tuam, wear down a couple of bodies. But there is this question now that some people have this Montpellier team, like, of this group of players. When you look at the core group of players, like, you actually forget how long they've been on the road for.
Yeah, and I suppose to a certain extent, like, they had I don't know, Paul. Like, I think there's an element of I wonder what is the conversation on Montpellier if they kick that chance at the very end of it, and that sends Tuam out, actually, and you probably won't be as harsh the word, but maybe you look at the different prism at Montpellier. And similarly, I watched the James's Milltown game. I thought it was, in the conditions that were there, I thought it was a really good game. But if the ball doesn't drop, it breaks absolutely lovely for Sam O'Neill, and he takes his goal really well after the initial chance didn't work out. But at the same time, again, if that doesn't work out, are they as buoyed as you think? Like, the margins of this stuff is really fine, is really fine. And I do think there's probably there's a broader conversation to be had about this, about, it's a frustration for me. I was talking to somebody else who would know Galway football even better than I would, like a lot better than I would. But we made the point, right, that I think part of the issue with the football we've seen this year is partly the weather. Like in Perth Stadium, that's a major extent. But because of that, you see teams playing against the conditions in the first half, and all they want to do is keep the phases as low as possible. They do not want, like, taking ages over kickouts, milking every single attack, going really, really slow. And for one reason or the other, there's no real ramifications. The time isn't added on in half time. It's a classic thing, 1 or 2 minutes in the first half. There's no incentive, there's no disincentive to playing unattractive football. And that's why we often get games that don't look as good. And I think that has been an issue across the groups, but definitely I think maybe that's something that Montpellier has come up against a small bit, that teams are trying. The first half is nearly, or the second, whatever, when they're playing stations, is nearly a write-off. So I wouldn't be as harsh about it. I think this, and again, this is why these games are so good. Like, this is such a huge opportunity for both teams. Like, there's absolutely, I think any team that's sitting down here and looking at their qualifying this weekend are starting to think, maybe they're not thinking, but there's a path to a final here if this falls nicely for us. So we get a result here, we bounce into a favourite semi-final and we'll progress through. And I'm not going to sit here and say that Montpellier have a lot of questions to answer and then come back on in 2 weeks when they're in a county final. I'll remain this weekend will tell a lot.
I think Mike Daly's going to come back in this weekend, though, isn't he?
Yeah, I would imagine so. Yeah, again, another player probably have managed reasonably well in terms of coming back in over kind of a period of games, and a guy that we've all kind of been crying out to see. And that's the one thing about Montpellier. They're brilliant. They have excellent leaders in that team. You could see John Daly, in terms of how vocal he is on the pitch. Donald at wing forward. From the very first day, he scored 1-2 their first group game this year. And it's just kind of, again, another on-field leader, so to speak. And Mike Dale just has that. I think as a player group, they're a very admirable bunch in that regard. What a luxury to have. What an unbelievable player to be able to welcome back in, to be able to manage as well as they have done. But now it's kind of do or die time. I would fully expect to see him come back in from the start.
I put the question to a couple of guests we've had on over the last few weeks. Montpellier last year in that group stage, I think people forget how good they were in that period. Their games against Down and Salthill, they're really flying it last year early on in the championship, then got caught to Mike Cullen. But a man last year was flying it for them in the group, Patrick Kelly. He was always just popping up with that goal at a key time.
Yeah, just these incredible breaks off the wing. Yeah.
But are we starting to see his loss somewhat, do you feel?
I don't know. I think I honestly think one of the most underappreciated aspects of what Galway went through this year was Patrick Kelly not being there, and the back issues that he's had, and it's totally understandable that if him not being there is going to have knock-on ramifications. And I think what happened, Mike Cullen just walked into a haymaker he didn't see coming against Montpellier. Sorry, I remember being in at that game, and they just, Mike Cullen had all their homework done. They were cheating on the Montpellier kickoff from the first minute. They really well. Whoever did their analysis, I genuinely don't know, but they were very well prepped for that game. And just totally, they read the signals. They went to town on Montpellier's kickout that day, and it was just they walked into a haymaker they didn't see coming. But in terms of the form that we saw last year, and that's the one thing about the groups, I wouldn't put as much stock as some people seem to be into. Like that, I think a lot of people might see that Mike Cullen's Salthill game is a bit more one-sided because of Saltill's form this year. I wouldn't be to the same extent, because I do think there's a clear separation that you can't draw a straight line from the groups of knockout stages. So it's a huge loss, to go back to your question. There's no getting away from that, but it's understandable. He was a proven inter-county player. He was in the running to be nominated for an All-Star in his debut year for Galway. It was those kind of clutch goals where he just comes with an incredible burst of pace. Drops the shoulder and manages to score. Who wouldn't miss that?
And it does really feel like Montpellier are going to target a big performance this weekend. But with St. James's, it's a very young St. James's team. If you take out Owen Carnan, Aaron Connolly, Johnny Dewan and Paul Conroy, it's the average age of that team goes down a lot if you don't consider them two players. So they're coming in with this one, nothing to lose, but it's a big occasion as well. It's something new for a lot of these players, because ultimately they only stayed up by the skin of their teeth last year. Yeah,
and I'd say I wouldn't be one bit surprised if that's a large degree of what they did this year, and Johnny Dewan I think has been absolutely immense this year, and he's really good. Again, another guy who, if he's dropping off as that kind of +1, he's very vocal in terms of getting them organised, or if he's forced to step up again, he is able to transition that across. And I'd say maybe the opportunity might have been there for him to go back to New York if he wanted to, but last year I'd say there was a lot of frustration around that. And Paul Conroy has been no real drop off in his performance. He's partnered by an incredibly exciting footballer in Sam there. So they have a lovely marriage between kind of that older cohort and some very exciting younger players. I thought James, when I saw them play against Mike Cullen, showed a lot. They put in a really kind of performance that day. So I don't think, and it's not a free hit. That's not what I'm saying at all for them this weekend. But I'd say a large degree of their season was motivated by putting right what happened last season, and that box is ticked.
There's been a structure and a system to James's this year. They haven't made it pretty for teams, and Montpellier don't make it pretty for teams either. They do like to bring certain numbers behind the ball, but they're a counter-attacking team, really. Montpellier, like they're going to look at Colin Ryan, James Foley, getting these players on the ball and hitting inside to Mike Daly or Barry McHugh.
Barry McHugh, yeah.
Is this one of the games that mightn't be the most enjoyable of the weekend to watch?
So yeah, okay. So I truly do not like referee conversations in GA. I think a lot of it is fractured, and I think it dominates analysis way too much. But in a game like this, I do think the interpretation from a referee, for example, right, I think these are two teams that rely very heavily on turnovers, on getting out quickly, and simultaneously, I think they're very good teams at stopping turnovers when they happen. At, you know, it could be just a tactical foul to make sure to slow them down, to not let that break happen. And if that's allowed to happen endlessly, that the reason in football most scores come from turnovers, that's the majority of scores, because that's when the game is most unstructured, right? So you're not facing a set defense, there's open lanes, you can go huge opportunities. That's what we all love to see, you know, that massive break after a turnover, everybody's going like, you know, a bat out of hell trying to break forward. So if, like, for example, if James Foley is running hard off a shoulder and is wrapped up two arms around them and stopped, then this game will be even more cagey. It'll be way less scoring. Because those turnovers will happen to a certain extent. It's just how much we maximize them. But otherwise, it's going to be, you know, that's that same thing. You're going to see, you know, teams setting into the arc, trying to get some sort of depth so to kind of create open lanes, but it'll be kind of over and back. A lot of reliance on both teams to, you know, to play what they see. Really good. Again, two teams with, from a leadership perspective, their core is very strong. So I'm sure that'll have a huge say in it as well. And then, yeah, as you mentioned, it would be a tight, cagey game. There's no getting away from that as well. But I think to what extent that is will be reliant on the conditions on the day.
I get the sense you're not fully sure where Montpellier are yet, but are they still in the county title conversation for you?
Yeah, I think so. Like, yeah, they are. You probably want to see a bit more, I would say. Definitely compared to what they maybe showed against Tuam, you'd want to see a bit more. And so yeah, I suppose, I know this is probably hindsight analysis, but if they come out this weekend and put the foot down, you'd be a lot more convinced about them. But I think they're a team that have been building a bit more, dealing with some fairly similar losses. Mike Daly back would be such a luxury and kind of offset that small bit. But like I you know, I wouldn't be as convinced as I was of them last year, but at the same time, like if I go into my head, I'd still tip them to win this weekend.
It's interesting midfield wise too, because Matthew Baird and Sam O'Neill have been both on the fringes of county panels. Paul Conroy's there too, like, so it's a big chance for Matthew Baird too this weekend. Yeah,
it is, and definitely for, I think, Sam O'Neill especially. I really think there's a really bright future for him. I think having Paul Conroy alongside him is just the perfect. You couldn't have picked a better partner in the county from his perspective. Yeah, and Baird on the flip side. One thing about these two teams though is that they don't tend to. I think there's certain teams. Tuam are pretty good at this too, and unless they're absolutely forced to, like down to 4th team in Blackheart, they won't be going necessarily long. They want to get hands on ball after kick out, so it's not going to be. You know, I don't want to misread this either and say it's going to be a you know, Baird and O'Neill competing in the air against each other for a spot with Galway. I wouldn't portray it that. It'll be that battle will be on the ground. It'll be in possession. That you see whatever kind of separation about that. And that's the one thing about Sam. Like, he really does glide over the ground. That was really noticeable, even in, you know, kind of dreadful conditions against Milltown. He still does just have that kind of burst of athleticism that is precisely what it's kind of a point of difference that you're hoping to put a bit of stock in from an intercounty perspective.
You expect Montpellier to win it though?
I think so, yeah, I think so. Like, again, I'm in no way confident about it, and I think, you know, what James' turnaround from last year is fairly remarkable. But if I was forced to make a call, I'd go with it.
Yeah. Corofin Tuam, there can be anything about this more than kind of giddiness and excitement. If you look at it, because if you look this year at the league final, it went all the way to penalties. And you look previously in county final meetings, Tuam have took Corofin to replay. These games take on a life of its own, and there's never much between them.
Yeah, they don't. I did first draw out last night. You couldn't, from a Tuam perspective, you couldn't ride it. Can you imagine just the elation from from Monday night into Tuesday, and a very positive result and a good performance, and now turn around to this on Sunday. You literally couldn't write it. And then from a Corofin perspective, they're coming off the back of an unbelievably convincing group campaign, by far the best team in that group. I think Corofin are a really interesting team. Like, principles of play that they have now, they're not that far away from the great Corofin team. They have a very good manager, probably just don't necessarily have the same caliber of player that they had. And that's obviously offset then again by Ian Burke and Jason Leonard being away. But then on the flip side, you look at it, and like I think I remember doing a bit of digging into this, and I think Gary Sice is still there top in terms of score involvement. Like, what an intelligent player. It's kind of remarkable that he's still able to do that. Patrick Egan has shown a lot of really good form. Tony Gill has shown a lot of really good form. Dylan McHugh has been an absolute sensation. Like, talking about Galway midfield options, the more and more I see of him, the more I think that he could have a future there. It's absolutely amazing to see Kieran Malloy back. As I said to you before, I think there's this perception about their full-back line which just doesn't tally. And then you go beyond that. I think Stephen Rochford might have been doing a couple of sessions with them this year. They've got Dave Morris, who's probably the best analyst in the country, or at least one of them working with them as well. So from Corofin are just cruising along, absolutely lovely. But crucially, they have a draw now against
Are they coming into this one not tested enough? I know people will argue that there was games against Killannon and Outrear, but really there were games where they led for the majority of the game. Like, they have seemed to, under Johnson, show a different style where it's kind of a lot of control to their play.
Yeah, I think so. And I think part of that is necessitated by what they're like, I'll be honest with you, Paul, I do think part of one of the games that is an example for me of this the issue in terms of what we're seeing with how teams are playing. I do think you saw elements in the Killannon Corofin game, I thought, in Pearse Stadium, where it's just too slow. Like, it's just not, it's very hard to play against a team like that who and Killannon came back very well in the second half that day, but I think there's an element of you have to play what you're up against. Like, the way I think Corofin went out against Sawtell fully expecting a blockbuster test, and that's why from the throw in that day they scored a brilliant goal and just pressed really hard. Like, I remember the tackle that went in on William Friendly for the second goal, just hit him with a vengeance, and again they went for the throat straight away. So they're still like fully invested in the thing. I think their style of play, like, part of that is necessitated by not having, like, look, the reality is Gary Sice is such an intelligent player. He knits it all together very nicely, but you're not going to be pumping balls down on top of him. You don't necessarily have the luxury to do that. So a lot of it is in terms of coming up against that set defence, coming over and back, kind of get very quick switches, no play, drop a shoulder, make as many breaks as you can, get Kieran Roy or Dylan McHugh one-on-one with somebody, let them come onto the ball. Candy is coming down and looks very nice. And as I mentioned to you before, even like you look at the actual raw scores, and Gary Sice isn't necessarily at the top of it, but in terms of assists or secondary assists, his involvement, just how smart a footballer. I don't know if you remember the goal he scored at the start of the second half against Sawtell, but his run there was absolutely perfect. And they're so good at that. They really do take advantage of, if they get that chance to turn a team over, like hit hard and get out quickly. That's when they will actually kick the ball, is when they have that opportunity. So you can't afford them that. And that's the only thing about Tuam is, watching them last night, they had number 18 cracker a point at his left foot, Shane Curtin, is it?
Yeah, Shane Curtin.
The wing back. He was trying to drop off last night as that kind of +1, but they didn't have they're a brave team. A lot to like them defensively, but that there would be vulnerable, even a couple of times last night where we got out on turnovers and the chance to break down just to maybe skid execution at pass not sticking. And I think Corofin I think if a goal chance we had to start you've got me here now as in PTSD, like thinking about this game, but that kind of breakaway chance, I think Corofin will really take that. So that's one thing that they'll want to be wary of. But even from a matchup perspective, like going back to Gary O'Donnell, how the rampage and he did in the wing, I think that's somebody you're going to have to send somebody after. Like I genuinely do think he's
Isn't this though where it gets interesting, because the Corofin half forward line we've seen against Killannon consisted of Brian Cogger, Tony Gill, and Jack McCabe, and like you're looking at like experienced veterans there, like Gary O'Donnell and Shane Curtins as the wing back, Rory O'Connor at 6. Like, these are all experienced players coming up against like really up and coming footballers who are going to have a bright future.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I suppose that's a good way of portraying it too. And then on the flip side, I think there's there's an expectation that, from a Tuam perspective, that like, you know, I think a lot of this is going to come down to you know, their week prep here now, and how, you know, trying to get those your kind of key matchups right. So that, you know, I look at their half forward line on the flip side too. Like, and I think they're, you know, Brian Mannion is inside. He's an exceptionally, before he's big, he's jinky, but he's a great tackler. He works back really, really hard. So if you could manufacture a situation where he's tracking Liam Gill, I think they'd be relatively happy with that. Mark Holleran is, you know, he's a brilliant scorer, and you know, so do you necessarily want him to end up hunting after, you know, and he's like, his left foot, it's such a sweet strike of the ball. Do you want to end up in a situation where he's tracking, you know, for argument's sake, Kieran Malloy all over the place? I'm not necessarily sure. So there might be an element of, I'd say a large degree of maybe swapping it around there, and how do you get, let's say, players inside, and then, you know, what do Corofin do in terms of Jamie Murphy? Again, another guy who probably isn't scoring necessarily as heavy as we're used to, but such a clever player, as I mentioned, for that Radigan point last night. It was just, you know, the classic thing, like one run, no ball, 2 run, no ball, 3 run, gets the ball, the exact perfect, really unselfish pass, and they get a point on the back of it. So from again, it's another game from a match perspective you'd be very excited about.
Did something Tuam bring though? Chaos.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, I think I would say with Tuam, and like, they're an adaptable team, right? So when they went down to Blackman last night on Tuesday night, for example, they conceded to kick out. They dropped off. They want sort of hit hard around the halfway line on their own kick out. As I mentioned, they're obsessed, just get hands on ball. So they went short with every single kick out. Ironically, actually, every single kick out that they got off went short. In the entire first half, 100% on their own kick out, all short. Second half, one short kick out that didn't work out, and they got a black card on that kick out. You know, man going down the ball, Donny falling up his back, gets the hand in there, is running away, it's a hand trip, black card. And then they're forced to go out long, and they lose every kick out. They 4 in a row, they lose every kick. We get 4 shots off it, don't score a point. So, you know, when they're forced out, so that's the thing, from a Corofin perspective. Like, if you're watching this game, watch how Corofin press. I think it'll be a really intriguing element of this game. Do they go man on man, or do they go 4-4-4? I think it'll be so interesting. Are they able to force working out long? And in that situation, then you're relying on, you know, you really need to get, you know, I don't know if Collins, he came on yesterday, he might not start. He's a great fielder of the ball though. But you're relying on Radigan. Colleran is actually another brilliant fielder out there as well. So you're relying on them to really make a dent and to win that, to kind of break the box out, to go clever with it. On the flip side, then, as we've seen with Bernie Power, he's after, you know, if you want to go and press him, he'd ping it off across. So I'd be really intrigued to see what do Tuam do on Corofin's kick out. But like, you know, for all intents and purposes, you could see 2 teams here who go out trying to press kickouts hard, who are, you know, really good runners of the ball, players with a huge amount of pace. It could be I think this could be a cracker of a game.
The last game against Berna, Ronan Steede's been kind of held in a reserve for a lot of championship. Mike and Martin Farrer have been. Dylan Wall's kind of had 1 or 2 injuries. Like, it's intriguing now to see, do they kind of stick with some of these younger players, or are some of these like more experienced players going to come in a game like this? Yeah,
so I think they were kind of hamstrung in that group game because they were already qualified, right? But their intermediates are playing. That game was fixed for a Sunday. Their intermediates are playing their second team, sorry, were playing Saturday. So you can't, because of that, there's not as much scope to experiment as maybe they might have wanted to. You know, but it's a kind of a tricky enough situation from a manager perspective, and I'm sure you know, it's something that Kevin had to weigh up in his mind. How do you approach a game when you've already qualified, and do you rest up and focus on a quarterfinal, or do lads need a blowout ahead of a game 2 weeks later? So I think that was a relatively tricky situation for them. I think we've found it pretty hard to get a full read on, you know, Farrer was with Montevideo coach perspective. We weren't necessarily sure how much we would see him. As you mentioned, Dylan Wall was injured. The loss of Ian and Jess Leonard probably offsets a need for somebody else to come in there. But yeah, like, from a selection perspective, it will be particularly interesting. It'll also be interesting, even if we do see a selection, where do they line out? Like, where does Dylan McHugh actually play? Where does Kieran Malloy play? I think would be particularly interesting.
Where do you see them playing?
Every time I've seen a Dylan McHugh this year, I think the more and more I see him, the more I think he's tailor made to be a midfielder. Like, he's an assist king. He's unbelievable under kickouts. He's a complete leader in that team. As an absolute nightmare, you're going to have to. I think the reality is you're going to have to send somebody after him. You know, Keane Hernan played midfield for Barna last night, and they were very kind of conscious of that. So, you know, Keane has played a bit as wing back, but moved up a line, and Radigan kind of followed him over. I think if Dylan McHugh goes into midfield, it's kind of similar enough players, and there's a necessity again to you're going to see a guy who's going to occupy your mind all over the pitch. So I think, you know, Malloy will end up playing at kind of that wing back position, and you know, he scored 2 goals against Carl Shahan, was absolutely electric against Othill. As a guy who, yeah, you would fully expect to be kind of attacked. A lot of their biggest threats to a certain extent are those runners they have from deep, especially off turnovers. They just go from everywhere. They have really good depth in their attack. Like, they get players into that inside line, stretch defenses all over the place, are very controlled with possession. So I would expect to see much of the same.
Corofin shaded, is it?
I think so, yeah. I think only thing from a Tuam sector, you would feel a small bit. I'm sure they're absolutely buzzing, and there's no complaints in there, and they'll come on a wave of momentum. But 5 days is tough. Like, it is really, you know, you train on Thursday. It's, if anything, it's just a hit out, and then you're in doing video and stuff. It's a really tough thing to turn it around in 5 days. I thought the pitch was in great condition in Duggan Park last night, but even still, that it just will take its toll. Like, it's inevitable. So from a Tuam perspective, turning around in those 5 days against a very good Corofin team is tough. I cannot wait for this game. Like, I think this could be a brilliant game. But again, if you're pressing me, I say Corofin win it.
It was true last year as well in the group stages as well. So nothing between them. The final quarter-final is interesting. It's Claregalway Milltown. Claregalway, there's injury concerns with Jack Lynn and Jason Riley. Not too sure what the situation is there. Milltown, I've seen it up front. My own club handed down. Large parts of the game, the better team. They come in the last 10 minutes with this spirit and character that is just bred into these lads. Like, you're thinking if Claregalway keep Milltown in a battle this week, it's going to get interesting.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. Like that, and it's very striking. I thought it was actually striking during the James game too. Like, Milltown just weren't, you know, the complete refusal to die. Maybe the first half kind of started a bit slow, and then, you know, like a complete stalwart like Micheál Martin, who just, you know, it's like just pure iron will, like just trying to this ability to drag him back to, you know, always has a man mark. He always seems to be able to find the yard and unleash that kind of snapshot that he has that could, you know, turn the game effectively. So from a perspective, this is kind of a clash of styles to a certain extent, isn't it? Like, and it's a game again that there's like so much intrigue. Just like from a Claregalway perspective, they're coming on an absolute wave after group stages. There's a spine there that they've been relying on for the last few years that they still probably need to step up and to do more. I think it's great to see Mark Rowan back on the pitch, like a guy who was electric underage and then was just kind of haunted by injuries, really. And then from a Milltown perspective, like, I would say that, you know, I don't know now, but I would say that the outcome of that game kind of stung. And then they were caught in that horrible situation, a very similar situation that they were caught in last year, where they're watching on, and because the other games were delayed, every other team knew what they needed. So there was every feasible opportunity that they could have, if results had fallen a different way, they could have ended up in that situation playing against the Tuam, for example, in a Premier quarter-final game. So the turnaround from how they respond to that James game, I think, is the ultimate challenge. Like, they probably were watching with interest what happened last week, would have realised they were okay and they're going to be into a quarter-final, and now they know that they've got Claregalway. So, but, you know, from Gerald Jennings' perspective, how the team as a whole kind of kick on now will be very interesting.
How do you expect them to respond?
But yeah, I mean, the only way that they know how, like, I come out absolutely, you know, like Cowboys and Indians stuff, and completely and utterly, you know, committed to the cause and put up a kind of huge heart. Like, I wouldn't expect, it's not a team. I wouldn't have any worry whatsoever about Milltown in that regard.
But when you do look at Milltown and you look at certain teams, there's a lot of club teams out there that maybe have 3 or 4 scoring forwards, but Milltown have 3 or 4 like unbelievable scoring forwards. Mark Hare, Mike Main, O'Manion, and Liam Costello. Yeah,
and I thought Liam Costello was absolutely excellent against James. I thought he really carried the fight, you know, really drinking pace. as I said to you about Mike Martin, I just think what more can you say in that regard? And that's a huge concern. And I think from a Milltown perspective, there's a lot of teams maybe they wouldn't like to see coming because they'll drag them all out of shape. You're kind of demanded to get a lot of players behind the ball to get into your set defence. And I don't necessarily see Claregalway necessitating that to the same degree. Like, there probably is a bit more freedom for them if they want to leave 2 or 3 up. They'll kind of have the ability to do that. Now it's ironic that probably the most athletic of them, like Liam Costa, and we just love to see him at the top end of the pitch. But I don't see them being dragged out of shape here and get into this kind of cagey affair. Like, you would hope that they'll have. I think the problem with that James game was that the conditions were so bad that you couldn't kick the ball. It just wasn't. It wasn't on that day, and I'd say that was a real frustration with a forward line like that. Whereas, I mean, I actually haven't checked, but I hope we'd have better conditions this weekend.
Galway Milltown met last year. Mark Hare had a chance, a free at the end of that game, and if he put that over, that would have sent Milltown through. But then obviously they lose out by a point in relegation. On Jason Riley and Jack Lynn, like, they feel huge. I'd say Jason Riley's probably more than likely up against it this weekend. It looks somewhat of a twisted knee in that game against O'Moore. I'm not sure Jack Lynn, but they're 2 huge players because they just give them such energy and power from deep.
Yeah, and Jack Lynn especially, another guy who the last year has been very frustrating from an injury perspective, and he's kind of playing through a lot. You get the sense that has he been at 100% fitness? You would probably say no. Has he been actually close to it? You would probably say no. But yeah, he just provides so much for them. They had a lovely kind of, when they had Jack slightly deeper and Danny Cummins inside, and when Flaherty was inside with him as well, there was the spine of that squad was very strong. It was probably there to a certain extent last year. That was when they looked most potent, and yeah, look, I mean, Jack is integral to that. I'm actually not sure what his injury is, so just right one, I think that's up in the air. Like, I don't know if you put a huge amount of stock in that, but definitely, I honestly, Paul, I would go as far to say if Jack Lynn not here could change his tie like that. It was he's that kind of player who, if he's there, I think it would give, both from a psychological and from a tactical perspective, be such a plus for Claregalway. And if he's not, the exact same thing happens from a Milltown perspective.
What's impressed you most about Claregalway this year?
I think, like, again, another team who, there's always this talk about kind of coaches that have been out on them, and one thing you'd hear a lot is that Donny Buckley does a lot of work in Claregalway, the Kurt Mayo coach, and if that's true, you've got 2 Mayo coaches doing their work in Galway. But he would be associated with stand-up tackling, but his ability to kind of step players up, 1-0 up, and there definitely is an element of Claregalway where they're not, especially around that kind of middle area of the pitch. They're really good at. They're not dropping back to 45 and relying on the strength of numbers there. They are actually well able to press high, to stand the man up, footwork, all that kind of usual stuff that you would expect to see in a team. That they have that ability to go and hunt the team down. They kind of hit with a bit of vengeance and tackle hard. And that's, like, I think it's probably more of a potent way of playing football, that they wouldn't, if Claregalway come up against a team with what I'm talking about earlier, where they would try and hold the ball, make possession, work over and back, very retentive, Claregalway would be able to go and hunt them down. I'd be fully adamant to that, and I don't necessarily know if I would have said that over the last couple of years.
With that, there's a competition there now in the full forward line. They've had Rowan, Nathan Granger has looked really sharp, and Conor Flaherty inside, but Danny Cummins is hunted down to get into that full forward line too.
Yeah, and I mean, I know I'm repeating myself here, but I did think last year when they had Cummins and Granger feeding off of Flaherty, it was a lovely balance to it. As I mentioned, I think to see Mark Rowan back is brilliant, and he's just a footballer who is kind of capable of anything. It's kind of ironic that, and again, maybe it's encouraging, when you break down these 2 teams, the first thing that comes to your mind is the potential forward lines, like that's 4 scoring, very capable forwards. And on the flip side, you've got the exact same thing from a Milltown perspective. Be very interesting to see what the matchups there, especially from a Milltown perspective. Like, does Blake go after? Do you put him in at fullback and see how that goes? I'd be very curious to see how they go about trying to hold them. Like, you've got a guy you've got a full forward, if you want to call it, who you're going to have to be able to compete with physically. You've got one guy who just loves to come on the loop in Granger, and he's kind of got that burst of speed now, and probably has a pep in his step to a certain extent after getting exposed to Galway. Maybe might not have worked out the way he wanted, but certainly has a cause. And then you've got kind of two slightly different players depending on what they do the other side. But yeah, it'll be very interesting to see. Like, you probably have to end up playing a sweeper in front of that full forward line, regardless of the three that they go with.
Who's winning this one?
It's the hardest one to call of the four for me. I'm going to say Claregalway, but if Jacqueline doesn't play, I reserve the right to change my mind before the game starts. But as of now, I'd say Claregalway.
Yeah, his fitness seems like it's going to be a huge one. This one, just talking to Maurice Brosnan last week on the podcast, he talked about the importance of Spittle getting this kind of preliminary relegation game before they go into the dogfight. Well, not before they go into the dogfight, but if they lose this, they'll go into the round robin series and join the two teams that are already there, Michaels and Letchermore. So there's two games this weekend. It's Dunmore and Killannon, and it's Michaels Carstrand. The two winners are safe. The two losers, I presume, like, for all these clubs, it's a big one to be in, but like this game is huge now because with these like two going down to intermediate next year.
Yeah, it's like that's the 2 down 1 up thing is and it's also, I think it's kind of cool enough from, well, I suppose from every club's perspective, in that certainly from a Carlstrand perspective, you had the situation where I'm sure they went up in appeal too, and how much that was weighing on their minds. I also think that because of the 2 down 1 up and the way this group has fallen, that maybe it's probably to a certain extent lopsided. I would say, if from a Dunmore or from a Clan perspective, they probably fancy their chances against any of the other four versus themselves, where that could be again a very intense game. I'd say a huge degree of tension in it, and then you go into a relegation absolute dogfight in terms of those four teams. So yeah, like, I mean, there's no getting away from it. Like, I'd say it's a very anxious. We were there enough times, Paul, over the last decade. Like, it's really kind of anxious and you're losing players because whatever natural stuff, injuries, lads going away, lads going off in Erasmus, all that sort of thing. So yeah, from all those perspective, I'd say it's a fairly nervy weekend in store. I think Killannon are a very good team. Like, they drew with us at the start of the group. They came back and showed a huge amount of heart against Killannon. The two Sweeneys, when they're so complete utter stalwarts, they are probably, for a certain extent, the last couple of years they were kind of reliant on them. I think that's been offset a little this year, and then there's just been kind of cruelly struck with injuries. Walsh missed the first group game with an injury. Sweeney obviously did his ankle. John Heaney has been absolutely immense for them. I think I mentioned earlier that Brian Mitchell at the other wing back has been brilliant. I think they're a very good team. And the flip side is that they're coming up against a team who I also think are very good. I think Dunmore showed a huge amounts in the group stages. I think their core is very strong. I think Jake Slattery has been a sensation this year. They've got some very talented forwards. Gleeson as well is brilliant too. So that could be a great game. But yeah, in terms of a mind frame perspective, that's just going to be ridden with angst. It'll be real cagey. I'd say there'll be huge amount of turnout in there because the whole club will be conscious of what's on the line.
Who do you see the two avoiding the round robin series?
I think Killannon will win. And the other game, I don't know. That's such a hard game to call. I think the talk is that if Spittle lose, I think there's a bit of talk that maybe Finn O'Reilly actually won't be around, that he's going back. I'm not sure if you've heard that, but if that's the case, I think that would be a huge loss. Carla Stratton, it's so hard to get a read on. It's just a really difficult team to get a full sense of. I think they've got some excellent players. But the two against us, we played them 3 times this year. We played them in the league semi-final and the championship, yeah. And Joe Monaghan is a guy who centre forward, I think, has been absolutely brilliant. I've been really impressed with the two brothers in corner back and corner forward. It's a huge loss actually against us is that one of them went off. A very hard team to get a read on. I'd say, for the purposes of this, I'd say Killannon and Calstratton, and I'm sure somebody will remind me if I'm wrong on Sunday morning.
Just then, on the intermediate quarterfinals, you talk about the senior. We've obviously been doing the rankings with Barry throughout the senior and intermediate, but he's referenced so much that he doesn't feel there's much between 1 to 8 at all. And if you look at the quarterfinals this weekend, Illinois and Caltra at 4:15, that's part of a double header as well. But then at 2:30 you have Kilconnelly and St. Brendan's in Tuam Stadium, and then after that in Tuam Stadium you have Glenmally and Corofin Shamrocks, and as well on Saturday have Monavea Abbey and Michal Brannock's at 4 o'clock in Pierce. Like toss of a coin really at a lot of these games.
Yeah, absolutely. I have like the two teams who I was most impressed by in the previous year have drawn each other. I think Brannock's and Monavea. I think that is just you absolutely make a case that that's the game of the weekend. Like I've seen a lot of both those two teams, and they're just estimates. I know myself and yourself are big. This is a kind of recurring podcast, and like he has been immense for last year. But Jesus, what he did 2 weeks ago in Tuam was fairly sensational. And on the flip side, I think actually Glen Kelly. I watched. We played Monavea Abbey out there in the league, but won by a point. But geez, he was immense, and I remember thinking at the time we'll surely see more of him with the 20s. Now it didn't necessarily work out, but two brilliant forwards, two very good teams, very well set up teams, I would say as well, in terms of how they're coached. And that's I get. You go back to your point earlier about the power rankings and how close these teams are. Like I'm sitting here holding back tears because we didn't make a quarterfinal. Michal Brannock's better than Tomorrows this year. Monavea, we bet them by a point in the league. Like the things between these two teams, I think Monavea might have played a senior club from Mayo recently in a challenge and hammered them. I mean, tanked them. So like these teams that intermediate is absolutely stacked. Like they're really, really competitive teams. So I think for me that's the pick of it. And two incredibly stacked teams. But you could easily make a case that the other games are just competitive too, I suppose.
So do you see the winner of intermediate coming from Brannock's and Monavea?
Yeah, I think so. The two teams I kind of earmarked from the start, I think. And both have their own cause. I think, talking about causes, like I think Monavea will look back on last year and how competitive were all those senior games and kind of think, how did they come to this? How did they go down? I think there will be a large element of that there. And simultaneously, I think Brannock's coming on the wave of momentum. You've got the excitement, I imagine, it's on the young club about having a kind of a sensation up and coming as well. That's very powerful too. So I'm not sitting here saying I'm going to put my house on one of the two. But if I was, from the very start, I thought the two of them would have a right shout. And it just happens that they've drawn each other.
And just then on those three teams, there are 3 games. Who do you see joining them? Kilconnelly, Brendan's, Illinois and Caltra and Glenmally Corofin.
I think Glenmally, I think Caltra, and I can't call it to the game. I don't know.
You see a real chance for Brendan's?
I don't know. I think that I said this to you before. I think a quarterfinal is the perfect chance where you're going to catch a team. I do think there's a huge element that to a certain extent kind of floating under the radar. I'm not saying that any team is going to be taking. It's not the psychological thing about taking it for granted, but I definitely do think the football this year has been funny. It's been really games that haven't been necessarily as one-sided as we want. And I do think I really want to ask actually, Paul, and I'm talking broadly here, just across the weekend. I hope we get good quality games this weekend. I hope we do justice to the talent that's within the county, because I don't necessarily think we've seen that this year for a bunch of different reasons. There's no getting away from the weather thing. That is a genuine factor when we talk about this. But I don't know. I really do hope that if you're sitting here talking about kind of how bar some crackers, the real quality in games this weekend, I would be absolutely delighted. I hope from a broad perspective we do justice to the talent that's within the county, because it has been a frustration, I think, broadly, that maybe games haven't lived up to necessarily want. Even games that you expect to see powerhouses meeting and they end up being one side, or the flip side, games that are competitive, and they are very competitive, but they're not entertaining. So I would love and expect that we'll get both this weekend. And honestly, you could actually make a case that we will get that across all 8 games.
Yeah, oh no, definitely. Seems like we're going to be in very crackers just as well on the intermediate relegation. This weekend, the biggest game of the weekend, and probably people will feel is Carrow and Killearn, because whoever loses that looks like they're heading for junior football. Corofin's second team, then play Kilcarn Clonberne, and in the junior as well, Heffer play Menla in the Northboard decider, and then Foley Griffins Aero take on Carney Cashel. The winner there plays Clonberne in the junior Westboard final. So a lot of action this weekend, but that's all on our show today. Thanks a million to Maurice for coming on.